Hey guys, welcome back. This is Chand from studyeasy.org, and in our previous lecture we have added the data accessor object classes, right? And here is the class which we have coded in our previous lecture. If we check, we have a method in here which will return a list of users from the database, and this is the query which will be getting executed on the database when we would be calling this method. The query is pretty simple: select star from users. Now friends, in this particular class we need to also pass in a constructor object of data source in order to get started with this particular class, right? So in here, note that in here we have a constructor. The name of the variable is data source and the type is also data source. So this is something which we must know before we configure the bean. Now in this particular video we will do this particular thing with reference to XML. Definitely in our upcoming videos we will also see how to do the same with annotation configuration. Alright. Now friends, usually I prefer to keep the Spring Bean configuration file just inside the package of the class which would be used in the XML file. So in here we would be creating the configuration file just inside this package. Now moving forward, I can also see a silly mistake in here. There is a misspelled of this file. It should be appdao rather than appdoa. So let me quickly rename these two files as well. And Spring will definitely refactor these for us. So let me right click, and I guess there is no option of rename. I must go to refactor and then rename. Alright. So it would be like DAO, and we would be updating the references as well. Let us click on finish. Alright, let us do the same for this file as well. This is a silly mistake though. Let me click on finish, and now we would be adding the Spring configuration file. So I will highlight the package, right click, navigate to new, then we will click on this other option. And in here by default it is selected as Spring Bean configuration file. Let me expand this window a little. Alright, so by default I'm getting these two options of Spring, right? And this is because I have installed a Spring IDE plugin into my Eclipse installation. In your case, if these two options are missing, please go ahead and add a XML file. So in fact, a Spring configuration file is nothing but a XML file. So don't worry if the Spring options are missing from the previous window which we have seen. Alright, so in here we will be giving the name as Spring dash appdao config. A little big name, but don't worry. We will click on next. We will keep everything as default and we will click on finish. So here is our XML file. See the extension XML. So this is a plain XML file, and you can also type in all the tags by hand if you don't wish to make use of Java IDE plugin. Definitely this plugin makes life a little bit more easy. Alright, so let me expand this file, and in here we can see this particular tab of beans. First of all, we would require to add a new specific bean, and the name of this bean would be data source. So we will give the ID as data source. Now friends, note that I am following the convention of a variable. In here the name is data source, which is exactly the same which we have used as a name of the variable in our DAO class. So note that. Moving forward, the class which we would be making use in here is already available as a part of Spring jar files, and the name of the class file is driver manager data source. So let me type in here driver manager data source, and now I will click on browse, and it will give me this particular class which is from org.springframework.jdbc.datasource. Let me click on finish, and let me navigate to source now. So this is how the XML file must look when we will be adding this bean. Moving forward, we must add couple of properties into this particular data source. I have already coded these property into this text editor. Let me copy this from here and I will directly paste it in here. So it is normal to make use of normal text, copying paste in here. There is no issue. There is no restriction to add the beans from the option provided by the IDE. So in here, there are a couple of properties. Let us see what are these properties. Now friends, it is crucial to add this particular bean correctly, else our web application won't be able to connect with the database. So this is important. Moreover, I would recommend you guys to Google for data source bean and copy it and paste it in your XML file and then edit it accordingly. That would be a better practice. So sometime copying and pasting is a good idea. Alright, so let's proceed further. And in here there are 4 property. The first property name is driver class, where we need to give the driver name. Now the driver is com.mysql.jdbc.driver. We will talk about this in a minute because we need to add a jar file in order to get this particular driver. So we will add the jar file. We will also see this particular class in a minute. Moving forward, the next particular property is URL. Now friends, when it comes to URL, this particular name or this particular URL may differ project to project. In your project, this URL may differ. In our project, as we have installed all the database and the app is also installed in our local machine. This is the reason why the URL is localhost:3306/project. Project is nothing but the name of the database. And moving forward, we have the username and the password. The value as root. I have changed the password of root user as root, which is extremely not recommended in real life scenario, but for demonstration purposes it is okay. So these are the configuration you guys must configure accordingly based on your requirement. So this is the bean which we need to add, and based on this particular bean we would be adding a yet another bean. But before that, let us quickly add the jar file which is required. So let me open Google Chrome and we will search for the connector. So here is our Google Chrome, and in here simply search for MySQL JDBC driver, and the first search result would be from mysql.com download connector/j. J stands for Java. And now if we open this particular link, it will give us the download link for connector. It would be in the form of zip archive. Click on this download and it will, I suppose, start the download. No, it haven't started the download, but in here we have the link. No thanks, just start my download. If I click on this link, your download will start. I have already downloaded this jar file. Let me minimize this. It is on my desktop. Here is the zip file, and I have also extracted the zip file. So here is our folder, which is extracted zip file, which we have just now downloaded, and in here we have the jar file which we need. It says mysql-connector-java-5.1.40. Alright, so let me copy this jar file from here. Let me minimize this, open Eclipse, and now I will navigate to the bin folder. I will highlight the lib folder and I will paste the library inside webinf lib folder. And now finally, if we see, then we would be able to see the connector jar. Here we go. Highlight this particular jar, right click and add the jar to the build path. So I will navigate to build path and I will add the jar to the build path. Fantastic. Alright, so the jar file has been added successfully. Now we can also see this referenced library. If we see that, all the jar files which are added to the build path would be listed in here, and we can now easily see the jar file which we have just now added. Here we go. So now friends, if we traverse this jar file, we can easily see this particular class which is com.mysql.jdbc.driver. So if we traverse this com.mysql.jdbc, then in here we would be able to see the class which we would be using in order to connect to the database. Here we go. So this is the class which we're gonna make use in our bean. So this is fantastic that we have everything in place which we need in order to connect to the database. Moving forward, we need to add a yet another bean in here, and that bean would be based on our implementer class. So let us navigate to this beans. We will highlight the beans, right click and add a new bean. So now we will give the ID as very simple DAO bean, and the class which we will be making use in here is pretty simple. The class would be this app DAO implementer. So we will say app DAO implementer and we will click on finish. We will select the class, and now if we navigate to source, then it will give us a error, and the error would be because there is no argument constructor defined, and we would be like adding a constructor argument and we would be injecting this bean into this bean. Let me show you how we're gonna do that. We will again navigate to bean. In here we will right click and add a constructor argument, and we will give the reference as data source, and we will give the name as data source as well. Fantastic. I suppose everything which we need in this particular configuration file is here. Let me finally format this particular bean a little. Alright, so let me maximize this as well. So here is our configuration file, and in here we have this data source which is responsible for configuration related stuff, where we have username, password, URL, and driver class name and all required stuff, and then we are injecting this data source inside our implementer class using this bean whose ID is DAO bean. Fantastic. So everything which we need with reference to XML configuration is with us, and in our next video we will proceed further and we will see that what would be our next step to finally get connected with the database and fetch information from the table and display it on our web page. So a lot of interesting stuff is coming up. I hope I have made myself clear. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day and take care.